I'm glad all of you are here. And I know it's summer, and I know it's travel season, and I know that we therefore have people watching us live at this very moment, and we have people who watch us later, and we're delighted for all that, and we welcome all of you. I want to begin this morning with reminding you of a person I've talked about in the past, a man named Stephen Covey. When Covey was alive, he wrote many books, and he gave many, many speeches. I've been through his program, the Stephen Franklin Covey leadership program. I've listened to him speak. And because of his popularity, many quotations have been attributed to Stephen Covey. One of those quotations is this quotation. Mark will put it on the screen. He says, "Begin with the end in mind." Now, anybody can understand that quotation. When you begin a project, when you begin some kind of endeavor, you kind of know what you want to accomplish. You kind of have the picture in your mind you want to see in the end. So you begin, the very first step, you begin with the end in mind. And you can take that statement and you can play with that statement and you can say things like, lead with the end in mind. And so leaders know that if you're going to start some new endeavor and you want to get all the people on your team involved in that endeavor, you show them the picture of where you want to go and you get them all on board, and great things can happen. And that's the way many things have worked in this world. Some great things have happened. For example, and there are many examples, have you ever thought how amazing this company called Amazon is? Now, I may not agree with everything about Amazon, but I can hardly imagine how someone dreamed of a company where I could take my phone and I could click on an app and I can find on that Amazon app almost anything that I want. Household items, clothing items, tools, parts. And then I can hit the buy now button, and most of those things will be here within 2 days. And those who are part of the United States Postal Service know that much of what they carry now are things that come from Amazon, and we all tend to use it. And someone started a long time ago leading that organization with this end in mind. And even closer than that to us, in this little community, I'm amazed with the little store of Dollar General. You find them everywhere. You go to every small town in this side of the world, and there's a Dollar General. Towns where they don't have Walmarts and towns where they don't have shopping centers, they don't have shopping malls, and yet here's this little Dollar General, and you can go in there and you can find some grocery items, you can find some clothing items, you can find a little bit of everything, and it's really reasonably priced. I don't know who started that, but they were really clever. They were really bright. And they began to lead with that kind of picture, something like that picture in their mind. Well, we do another variation of the statement for our lesson this morning, which is exactly what Paul is going to be talking about as we finally get to the end of Romans chapter 13. He's going to be talking about live with the end in mind. Now, this is a simple lesson this morning. This is a brief lesson. And you can already guess what's going to be said, what Paul's going to say. That we live with the end in mind, and many of us are doing that. Many of us right now are doing that. And we're thinking about things like retirement, and what we want retirement to look like, and where we might want to live in retirement, and maybe we want to buy one of these motorhomes or one of these campers, and we want to travel in retirement, and we might want to have a second home someplace, and we have all these pictures that we're thinking about on how to live with the end in mind. The problem is, while that is true everywhere, sometimes we get the wrong end in our thinking. There's a story that Jesus told in Luke chapter 12. The story comes about because a man comes to Jesus and asks a question. He walks up to Jesus. He said, "Teacher, will you make my brother divide for me the inheritance?" Now, I guess that kind of thing's been going on all the way back to the day of Jesus, where siblings are arguing about fairness in the inheritance from their parents. Will you make this person, my brother, divide this stuff equally? And Jesus is kind of appalled at the statement. And Jesus said, "Man, who made me a judge over this? Who made me an arbiter of this?" And then he tells a story. And he tells a story to show the man that he's thinking about the wrong things. Now, before I go any further, I'm not going to say to you, I don't want you to get the idea that I'm thinking about planning for retirement is wrong. And I don't think that having a second home somewhere is wrong. I think all that's fine. But listen to the story of Jesus. It's about a farmer. You already know the story, don't you? About this farmer. He's been very, very successful. He already has a lot of things. This farmer has it all kind of put together. And now here he is, after all the success, and this one year, everything works better than apparently it's ever worked before. I guess the rains came at just the right time. He got the seed in the ground just at the right time. And he has a crop like he hasn't seen in maybe his entire life. And he's saying, wow. And he builds these bigger barns, and he puts all his stuff away, and he says, I finally have arrived. I've gotten to where I want to go. That's my paraphrase. I can retire. I can just take life easy. I can eat, I can drink, I can marry, I can travel in my travel trailer. I can do anything I want to do. And for some reason, Jesus says, that's a foolish way to think. That's a foolish way to think. How could it be foolish? What could be wrong with that? And Jesus goes ahead to say in the story, you know what? That man died that night. It was a foolish way to think. Now, not a single thing that man did was wrong. Not a single thing that man did was necessarily wrong. What was wrong was he didn't have the right, total, correct picture of the end in his mind. Everybody understand that? So we're all on the same page? And Paul ends this difficult Romans 13 chapter with this very thought. He talks about how to live with the end in mind, only he gets the whole picture in there. And so Bert's going to put it on the screen. I'm going to read it. It's a short passage, but we'll read it kind of slowly instead of like we do sometimes very quickly. He says, and do this, understanding the present time. The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because your salvation is nearer now than when you first believed. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. Now, what do you think he's talking about? The day is almost here. The night is almost over. He's talking about that our lives they're not going to last very long. Now, maybe he's talking more than that about the second coming of Jesus. But it's the same kind of concept. Jesus is coming again, and the scripture says he's coming again soon, and yet we're kind of like those people back in the days when Peter would write, and it hasn't happened for a long time. So I suspect that not a one of us got up this morning thinking this may be the day that Jesus gets here. Did we? And not a one of us got up this morning and began the day by thinking this may be my last day on earth. And yet we get little reminders once in a while, but they don't last long. I mean, last Sunday morning, we were announcing about a 26-year-old man who was killed in a car crash. And this Sunday morning, we announced about his funeral. And I'll guarantee you, he got in that pickup and started driving on that winding road. And he wasn't thinking that the end was at hand. Because we don't think like that. But this whole life is fragile. This whole thing can end so easily. It is a car accident that can happen so easily. It is a heart attack that can happen so easily. All kinds of things can just happen. And Paul says, yes, I want you to be people who respect authority and live in submission even when you don't agree with that authority. And I want you to really learn how to love people, but I want you to also understand the end is really near. And yet, you know what will happen to me this morning? I walk out of this building and I'll forget what I just said. I'll act like, I'll plan like, I'll talk like, I'll likely thinking, I got a long time. I may be in that nursing home someday, but it'll be a long time. I may be planted in the ground, but it'll be a long time. I mean, we were riding with some friends this week. We're taking them to eat in Weatherford, and they're from Tennessee, and we're passing a cemetery up on the highway, and he says, "See our new headstone?" And I'm thinking, Randy, you're my really good friend, but that's a little premature. It felt like to me. So, because it's close, he says, let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. I find that a really interesting statement because you know the people to whom he's writing? You know what people these are? These are kingdom people. These are followers of Christ. Even followers of Christ need to get reminded once in a while to put aside this evil stuff, the darkness stuff, and let us behave decently as we were living in the daytime so everybody could see type idea. Not carousing, not in drunkenness, not insulting people like Danny Taylor. No, I didn't say that. I mean, everybody still awake? Not in drunkenness, not in sexual immorality, not in debauchery, which means excessive sensual pleasure, just going in excess of everything to bring pleasure to your life. Not in dissension. You ought to underline that word. I mean, our whole country is filled with dissension. It seems to get worse all the time. And it just kind of spills over until we begin to think it's just normal and it's okay. And it spills over so far it gets into our families and it gets into our places of work and it gets into our church buildings. Don't live like that. Don't live in jealousy. Isn't that interesting? He's talking to kingdom people. And he's talking to us about immorality and excessive pleasures and dissension and jealousy. And all of us who already know Christ, but rather clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ. Don't think so much about how to gratify the desires of this flesh. What he's saying is, you need to understand. Ken, you need to understand. This life could be over at any moment. And therefore you ought to live right now with that end in mind. You ought to take that seriously. So I have two questions for you. I have two questions. Here's the first. If you knew that life was going to end tomorrow, what would you stop doing today? What would you need to stop doing today? You know, several years ago, I think the year was 2009 actually, I was introduced to a man named Bob Beal. I actually communicated with Bob Beal this past week, via text. Told him I was going to mention him in this lesson this morning. Bob Beal, still close to 80 years old, is consulting with people all over the world, coaching people all over the world. 2009, a friend of mine knew that I was in a lot of distress, probably had chronic anxiety, though it had not been clinically diagnosed. So he called and he said, I have this personal coach I've been using for 20 years, still uses him today. He's a really expensive personal coach. He said, I want to buy for you some time. Meet at this certain location. So I sat down. This man named Bob Beal sitting about the distance from me that Gary's sitting. He has this little thing in his hand he's writing on. He didn't introduce himself, didn't tell his background, didn't ask mine. Ask the first question. If you died tomorrow, what three things would you regret not having done? And I want the answer in 60 seconds. That was the beginning of Bob Beal and Ken Jones. That's lasted a long time now. If you died tomorrow, what three things would you regret not having done? And Paul is saying to us, if you died in the next bit of time, if you knew you were going to die, what would you stop doing right now? Interesting. Second question. If you knew it was going to happen right now, what would you start doing? I don't know the answer to those questions for you. I can kind of begin to figure them out for me. Okay? I can kind of begin to think about what they ought to be for me. All I know is Paul ends the 13th chapter saying, wake up. Jesus is coming again really quickly. Your life might not last very long. So get rid of the stuff that shouldn't be there and take on the stuff that should be there and clothe yourself in Jesus Christ. Wouldn't it be different and wonderful if you and I could live, truly live like that? I don't know what this world does. It just crowds in, it grabs hold of me, and I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that, and I'm not thinking about the end, the real end. But Jesus was. From the day he created this world, he was thinking about the real end. He was thinking about the day that he would arrive on this earth as a tiny baby, and he was thinking about the day that he would go to a cross and die, so that when we do experience death, we can have life with him forever. And he died for that reason. He was thinking about the end all the way back in the very beginning. Jesus did it right. He did everything right. And he's our master. He's our example.